It was a typical Tuesday in Harlem. The sun had just risen above the horizon, casting a warm glow over the slowly crowded streets. People were going about their daily business, busy coffee carts serving the hurried crowd, friendly conversations between familiar neighbors. Harlem was a vibrant place, a place where anything could happen. In the middle of the bustle was Malik. He walked with confidence, his navy blue suit pressed tight, his patent leather shoes reflecting the morning sun. At 35, Malik was no stranger to the neighborhood that had nurtured him, shaped him. People on Lenox Avenue nodded to him, as if he were part of the landscape. But this morning, the atmosphere was different. Malik approached his shiny black car, parked in front of an old brownstone. Before he could open the door, he noticed two officers walking toward him. Kirkland and Mendoza, the names on their badges. Their cold gazes never left Malik, their steps stiff and purposeful. Malik took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Excuse me, sir." Kirkland's voice rang out. Malik turned to face them, sensing the tension in the air. "Yes?" Malik asked, his voice even but not without his guard up. "May I see your identification?" Kirkland asked, his eyes narrowing in scrutiny. Malik had been through situations like this before. He knew how to keep his cool, as his father had taught him, always be polite, don't escalate. There was no reason to be stopped, but Malik also knew that the wrong response could make things worse. He pulled out his wallet, but couldn't help but ask, "May I know why?" Kirkland's eyes sharpened. "You fit the description of someone we're looking for. Just show me your ID." Malik slowly handed over the driver's license. Kirkland stared at it for a few long seconds, eyebrows raised, before handing the document back without a word. But then came the next question, just as Malik had expected. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" Kirkland's tone was accusatory, as if Malik didn't belong here. Malik kept his cool. "I live here. Just on my way to work." Kirkland glanced at Mendoza, who had taken a step forward, his eyes searching. "Where are you from?" Malik chuckled. "Breakfast at the diner down the street." Kirkland blinked, seemingly unsatisfied with the answer. He looked back at the driver's license again, as if he had just read the name on it. Then, suddenly, his expression changed. The two officers looked at each other, confusion evident on their faces. "You're Malik Johnson?" Kirkland's voice cracked a little. "Yes. Is there a problem?" Malik asked, his voice calm but his eyes sharp. Mendoza took a deep breath, his face pale. "Jesus. You're federal judge Malik Johnson?" Silence fell. Kirkland stood frozen, seemingly trying to digest the truth before him. Just minutes ago, they had been suspicious, questioning him like a suspect. But now, they realized they were facing one of the city's most senior judicial officials. Malik smirked, his cold eyes sweeping over them. "Do I still fit your description, officer?" Malik took a deep breath, keeping his tone even, trying to maintain his composure. "Is there a problem, officer?" "Just answer the questions," Mendoza said, his voice sharp. His hand moved closer to his belt, where the gun was. Malik clenched his fists, reminding himself of his father's words, "Stay calm, don't give them any reason." "I'm a lawyer," he said, hoping to end the conversation before things got worse. "I have a meeting in about an hour." Kirkland smirked, a smile that was not kind. "So a lawyer, huh? How interesting." The air around them suddenly became heavy. Malik could feel the change, an invisible tension creeping in, tightening the air. His breathing quickened a little. "Hey, officer, I didn't do anything wrong. I was just trying to get to work." Kirkland didn't bother to reply. He just tilted his head, gesturing toward Malik's car. "What if we look inside your car?" Malik's stomach tightened. He had nothing to hide, but he also knew how quickly things could go wrong. "I'd rather if you didn't," he said carefully. "I need to go." Kirkland stepped closer, his gaze cold, his hand touching the baton at his hip. "Get out of the car." Malik hesitated, and in a split second Kirkland had grabbed his arm, twisting it back. A sharp pain shot up his arm and Malik winced, but he gritted his teeth, trying to keep his voice steady. "What are you doing?" Malik protested, trying to keep his balance. Mendoza immediately lunged forward, pushing Malik to the ground. His knee pressed into Malik's back, taking his breath away. "You're under arrest for resisting arrest." Kirkland's voice was cold, devoid of emotion. Malik's mind raced. No. This couldn't be happening. He had done nothing wrong. Nothing. And now he was pinned face down on the pavement, handcuffs clasped tightly around his wrists. A small crowd had gathered, faces stunned and horrified. A young woman across the street held up her phone, recording everything. Malik saw her. A glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this video would tell the truth. But now, as he was pulled to his feet and shoved into the back of a police car, he knew the fight wasn't over. The police station was cold, sterile, and stifling. Malik was led through the booking area, his wrists still cuffed behind his back. His suit was wrinkled from the struggle, but he held his head high, refusing to let them see him subdued. The officer behind the desk kept his eyes on his computer screen. "Name?" Before Malik could answer, Kirkland spoke. "Malik Edwards." The officer tapped a few keys. His eyes flicked to the screen, then frowned, his gaze flicking to Malik and back to Kirkland. Something was wrong. But he said nothing. He simply gestured toward the cell. Malik was dragged away, fingerprinted, photographed. A small, cramped room with cold LED lights awaited him. When the cell door slammed shut behind him, with a resolute thud, Malik's heart sank. He sat on the hard bench, staring blankly at the peeling paint on the walls, trying to process everything that had just happened. He hadn't done anything wrong. But did it matter? How could this happen? How could someone like him, who had spent his life working hard and building a life he was proud of, be locked up here like a criminal? The success that Malik had paid for with sweat and tears now seemed meaningless. And this cramped cell, cold and stuffy, was imprisoning not only his body but also his belief in justice. The silence in the cell was broken only by the heavy footsteps of the officers outside. Malik remained calm, but inside, his mind was racing. Who would believe his story? Who would stand up for him? This injustice would likely be forgotten, buried in lifeless paperwork. But then, change began. Outside the station, the atmosphere was heating up. At first, there were only a few people watching with worried looks, but in a moment, the number quickly increased. News of the arrest spread like wildfire across the dry grass, and now dozens, then hundreds of people had gathered. They chanted his name, held up signs demanding justice, and held up phones to record every moment. Malik's mother stood at the front of the line. The woman, who had known so much pain and loss, was now using her voice to defend her son. Her face was determined, her eyes burning with anger. "My son doesn't belong here." Her voice was a command. And she wouldn't stop until the truth was revealed. Inside the police station, the atmosphere was just as tense. Lieutenant Ramirez stood by the window, watching the crowd grow larger. She knew from the moment she heard Malik's name that something was wrong. "This is going to get worse if we don't do something," she muttered, her gaze determined. In the hallway, Officer Kirkland walked, but this time without his usual confidence. A younger officer ran up to him, his face tense. "Kirkland, do you know who you just arrested?" "Just another troublemaker." Kirkland shrugged. "No, he's not an ordinary man. That's Malik Edwards. One of the biggest civil rights lawyers in the city. He was on the front page of the paper last week. He's fought for so many people. If word got out that we arrested him without cause, can you imagine the consequences?" For the first time since his suspicions had surfaced, Kirkland couldn't hide his confusion. If he'd made a mistake, if this was really a false arrest, the consequences would be dire. Time passed. The cell was as cold as it had been, but now, noises from outside began to seep in. Malik raised his head when he heard the door open. Lieutenant Ramirez stood there, her face expressionless. "Mr. Edwards," she said, her voice solemn. "You are free to go." Malik rose slowly. After hours of sitting on the hard chair, his body was stiff, but his eyes were still bright. He was no longer alone. And his fight for justice had only just begun. That he didn't say a word as he followed her through the police station hallway. There were averted eyes, averted glances of concern. Malik could feel the shame, the tension in the air. Though no one spoke, the heavy silence said it all. As they stepped out the door, a wave of sound hit them. The crowd waited outside, their faces filled with anger and determination. As soon as they saw him, they chanted in unison. Slogans of justice, calls for change rang out incessantly. Malik stood still in the storm, his eyes sharp but calm. He knew, this was only the beginning. Ramirez hesitated, then after a moment of silence, she said softly. "I'm sorry for what happened today. It shouldn't have happened." Malik looked her straight in the eyes. His voice was low but firm. "You're right. It shouldn't have happened." He turned away, walking straight toward his family. His mother rushed to hug her son, her arms shaking with anger and relief. All around, reporters jostled, flashbulbs flashed, questions rang out, but Malik didn't answer. He didn't need to say anything now, because the real fight was still ahead. In the days that followed, Malik's wrongful arrest became a media storm. The video, shot by an eyewitness, went viral, sparking public outrage. Debates erupted across newspapers and television shows: racism in the police force, injustice in the justice system, and the responsibility that people like Kirkland and Mendoza should bear. The two officers were suspended pending an internal investigation. But for Malik, that wasn't enough. He filed a lawsuit against the police department, determined to bring this to light. The city was divided. One side defended the police, saying they were just doing their job. One side sided with Malik, seeing him as a symbol of the fight against injustice. But Malik didn't care who was on whose side. He only cared about the truth. The trial took place months later, capturing the attention of the entire country. The courtroom was packed. Malik sat in the front, surrounded by his legal team. His expression was calm, but his eyes were piercing. Kirkland and Mendoza stood in the dock, trying to justify their actions. But the truth was undeniable. The evidence was overwhelming: video footage, witness testimony, irrefutable documents. Their defenses fell apart bit by bit. When the verdict was finally read, the room exploded. Malik had won. The police department was held accountable, Kirkland and Mendoza were fired. But despite the victory, he did not smile. Walking out of the courthouse, facing the cameras and the hopeful eyes of the community, Malik spoke, deep and powerful. "This is not just about me. This is about all of us. We deserve to be treated with respect. And we will not stop until we do." In the months and years that followed, Malik continued to fight. He was no longer just a victim of wrongful arrest. He became an icon, a beacon of light for justice. The police department was forced to reform. But he knew, the road ahead was long. And he was ready to continue, for the cause. Malik walked slowly down the familiar Harlem streets that had shaped him. The late summer air was still warm, but inside he was burning with a different fire, the fire of change. The legal battle he had just won was more than a victory, it was an affirmation that justice was not out of reach, that the city could still be a place where everyone was treated fairly. His phone was buzzing with supportive messages, interview requests, and new cases pouring in. But Malik refused to rest on his laurels. He knew that a successful lawsuit or a changed department would not immediately topple a system. Real reform took time, and he was ready to move on. That evening, he went to Sylvia's, Harlem's iconic restaurant, where every meal was a reminder of his roots. He sat across from Emma Rodriguez, a community organizer with sharp eyes and an unquenchable passion. She had been an integral part of the recent legal campaign, and now she was thinking beyond it. "We can't let the city sleep again, Malik," Emma said urgently. "All eyes are on us now. If we don't seize this moment, it will pass." Malik sipped his iced tea, his eyes quieting in thought. "I know," he said slowly. "But legal change is only part of it. We need structural change, something that's sustainable." Emma leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. "What about that civilian oversight board we've been pushing for years? Now is the perfect time to put it on the table." Malik mused. A civilian oversight board, an independent body that would oversee police performance, wasn't a new idea, but after his lawsuit, it had a real chance of becoming a reality. "You're right," he said, his voice full of determination. "If we can get the community to be involved in oversight of the police, that would be a game changer. But we need the city council on our side." Emma nodded. "Then we have to put the pressure on now. They won't change unless we force them to." Malik took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. But he wasn't alone. People like Emma, like the Harlem community, like the people who had stood with him in the lawsuit, they were the reason he couldn't stop. A more just world wouldn't happen by accident, but he was willing to fight for it. Out there, Harlem was alive, vibrant with its spirit. And Malik knew, this was just the beginning. Emma said firmly, "With everything that's been going on in the media, they'll have no choice but to act." Malik nodded, his mind painting a vision of a city where police officers were accountable not just to their colleagues but to the people they served. An ambitious dream, but a necessary one. In the days that followed, he threw himself into the movement with all his might and conviction. He held meetings with activists, lawyers, and even some politicians who were sympathetic to the cause. But not everyone was on board. Malik faced fierce opposition from city officials, the police union, and those who had long opposed any form of reform. He was used to hostility, but sometimes it was enough to deter anyone. Late one afternoon, as Malik was walking through Central Park, trying to calm himself, his phone rang. An unfamiliar number. He considered passing it by, but some part of his instinct told him to press the button. "Malik?" The voice was cautious but sincere. "This is Ramirez. Can we meet? There's something I think you should know." Malik paused. "Lieutenant Ramirez. The one who had released him from his cell that night." She was different from the other officers, but he still wasn't sure he could trust her. Still, curiosity won out. "Where?" Malik asked, his voice calm. "Union Square. 1 hour. Neutral." She answered quickly, as if reading his mind. An hour later, amid the bustle of Union Square, the sound of skateboarding, the laughter of children, the street performers busy with their work, Malik found Ramirez. Out of her police uniform, she was dressed in civilian clothes, looking more at ease, less tied to the system she served. "You didn't have to come," she said, gesturing to the empty space beside her. "But I'm glad you did." Malik sat down, his body as tense as a spring. "What's going on?" Ramirez looked around, eyes searching, as if to make sure no one was listening. "Listen. I know you've been fighting this fight for a long time. And what happened to Kirkland and Mendoza was wrong. There's no other way to put it. But the problem is much bigger." Malik frowned. "What do you mean?" Ramirez took a deep breath. "There are high-ranking officers within UPS who are actively sabotaging the reform effort. They're not just against change, they're actively working to prevent it. Some of them don't want the public to know the truth. Don't want anyone to know how deep the corruption runs." Malik felt a familiar anger rising in his chest. "And now you're telling me why? Do you suddenly have a conscience?" Ramirez frowned, her eyes glinting with weariness. I've been part of this system for a long time, Malik. I know how it works from the inside. But after what happened to you, after seeing the way the community came together, I can't stay silent anymore. Malik stared at her, searching for any sign of deception. But all he saw was exhaustion, the weariness of someone who had shouldered the burden of a corrupt system for so long. I want to help. Her voice was soft but firm. I can give you names. I have documents. Malik nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Ramirez's face. He didn't trust her completely, but in this situation, any information could be the key to opening a new door. Okay, he said, his voice low, but his eyes never wavering. But if we're going to do this, we have to do it right. One wrong move and it's all going to fall apart. Ramirez looked at him for a moment, her eyes filled with tension. She handed him a small file, her hands shaking slightly. This is just the beginning, she whispered, her eyes not daring to look directly at Malik. It felt like she was trying to hold on to something that was about to fall apart, about to be exposed. Back in his office, Malik opened the file, his heart clenching as each page unfolded before him. There were internal emails, memos, meeting minutes, and as he read, it all began to make sense. What had only been a feeling before was now coming into sharper focus. There was a cabal within the police department that was secretly undermining every attempt at reform. They were manipulating the numbers, covering up police misconduct, and even fabricating cases. Malik felt a wave of unease rising in his chest. This was worse than he had imagined. He couldn't do this alone. He needed help, and he immediately contacted his legal team, along with a handful of trusted journalists, including Clarenguian, a fearless investigative reporter he knew would stop at nothing. Together, they began piecing together the evidence, and with each new discovery, the truth about the intrigue within the department began to emerge. Clara looked over the documents, her eyes wide. Malik, she said, her voice choking, if this gets out, we'll have to prepare for dire consequences. We have to be strategic, Malik insisted, his voice as hard as steel. We can't do it all at once. First, we have to build momentum, we have to get the public to support us. We can't let them crush our hopes. Clara nodded, saying nothing more. She understood. I'll start with a series of articles exposing UPS's cover, she said. Then we'll attack the corruption at the top. It has to be calculated. Over the next few weeks, Clara's articles came one after another. Each article revealed a new layer of corruption in the police department, each revelation fueling public outrage. The city was erupting, protests erupted one after another, calls for reform growing louder. But Malik sensed a shift in the air. Each new article made him feel like he was walking a fine line. They had gone too far, too close to a dangerous line where the powerful would not sit idly by and watch their empires crumble. One evening, as Malik left the office, a strange feeling rose within him. The streets were unnaturally quiet. He saw a black SUV parked across the street, a car he had seen here before. It had always been hidden, but today it was different. It was no longer hidden, but looking straight at him. As Malik reached for the car door, a figure stepped out of the shadows. A tall man, dressed in dark clothes, his face partially obscured by the dim streetlights. Mr. Edwards, the man said, his voice soft but cold as a warning. We need to talk. Malik immediately felt his hand tighten on the phone in his pocket. Every sense was on alert. Who are you? He asked, trying to keep his composure. The man smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. That doesn't matter, he said, his voice still cold, what matters is that you understand the game you're playing. You've made some very powerful people uncomfortable. Malik straightened, refusing to let the fear overwhelm him. He knew that this was no longer a simple struggle. This was where things were starting to come to a dead end, and he had to find a way out, even as the world around him tightened around him. That if you're trying to scare me, it won't work, Malik thought, but in that moment, he couldn't help but feel something in his heart. The other man's smile had faded. It wasn't a threat, it was a warning. Mr. Edwards wasn't just warning him of what lay ahead. He was advising him, sternly, to give up before things got out of hand. But Malik, though his heart was pounding in his chest, kept his voice cool, betraying no fear. "I'm not giving up." He might be faced with things no one wanted, but one thing was certain, Malik wouldn't back down. "You can tell whoever sent you that," the other man froze, his sharp eyes flashing with promise. "This will be the biggest regret of your life." The man turned, walked quickly toward the SUV, and disappeared into the darkness of the night. Malik stood there, his hands clenched, his eyes fixed on that back. Everything was closing in around him, but he knew that, despite the danger that lurked ahead, he could not turn back. Every decision, every move, had been made. And then, in the days that followed, the risk grew, as if someone was watching him, every step. Anonymous phone calls, strange figures standing outside his office, even a brick thrown through his window, with a clear message, "Stand back." But Malik did not falter. The Civilian Review Board was gaining traction. And thanks to the valuable documents Ramirez had provided, they were close to winning the city council support. Things were going so well, they could almost reach their goal. But then, one afternoon, when Malik got a call from Emma Malik, he felt a shiver run through his body. "You need to see this," she said. The video Emma sent him tightened Malik's heart. A group of men with their faces covered were burning a stack of papers, and the caption at the bottom of the video was just one sentence: "This is what happens to those who betray themselves." Malik's heart clenched, a wave of anxiety washing over him. It was no longer a threat. It was a reminder of the price he would pay if he continued down this path. He hurriedly called Emma back, but there was no answer. Ramirez, she had stopped talking. Malik knew that now, her life hung in the balance. Finally, he found her hiding place, a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. She looked exhausted, her face haggard, as if she had been through a long nightmare. When she saw him, she whispered, "We know I helped you. But I don't know if it was enough." "We'll protect you," Malik said, though he wasn't sure. But he knew, no matter what, they couldn't back down. "You did the right thing," she replied, her eyes full of regret. "But they'll come for me. And if they don't, they'll come for you." Malik put his hand on her shoulder, a gesture of commitment, though he couldn't see the future. "We're not backing down. It's too late to turn back," he vowed, his voice firm. And then, a week later, Clara discovered the names of the high-ranking officials behind the corruption, the ones who had been quietly siphoning off the fake news and silencing the critics. This was the truth Malik had been searching for, and it was ready to be released the next morning. But that night, Malik couldn't sleep. He knew that once this story was out, there would be no turning back. But it was too late, he had gone too far, there was no turning back. The next morning, the city woke up to a shocking headline in the newspapers: "Corruption in the high ranks, the dark side of the NYPD." The consequences began to appear immediately. He hurriedly called Emma back, but there was no answer. Ramirez, she had stopped talking. Malik knew that now, her life hung in the balance. Finally, he found her hiding place, a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. She looked exhausted, her face haggard, as if she had been through a long nightmare. When she saw him, she whispered, "We know I helped you. But I don't know if it was enough." "We'll protect you," Malik said, though he wasn't sure. But he knew, no matter what, they couldn't back down. "You did the right thing," she replied, her eyes full of regret. "But they'll come for me. And if they don't, they'll come for you." Malik put his hand on her shoulder, a gesture of commitment, though he couldn't see the future. "We're not backing down. It's too late to turn back," he vowed, his voice firm. And then, a week later, Clara discovered the names of the high-ranking officials behind the corruption, the ones who had been quietly siphoning off the fake news and silencing the critics. This was the truth Malik had been searching for, and it was ready to be released the next morning. But that night, Malik couldn't sleep. He knew that once this story was out, there would be no turning back. But it was too late, he had gone too far, there was no turning back. The next morning, the city woke up to a shocking headline in the newspapers: corruption in the high ranks, the dark side of the NYPD. The consequences began to appear immediately. The officers were suspended from the investigation, and Malik's name echoed across the country. But most importantly, the Civilian Review Board, a system that had been neglected and corrupted for years, was finally being held accountable. The city had suffered so much, but now it was slowly recovering. The first rays of hope were emerging from the stormy sky. The Civilian Review Board was established and put into operation. Reform, albeit slowly, was creeping into every corner of the police department. Malik did not want to be a symbol of this fight, but whether he wanted to or not, he was a beacon of light on the path to justice. He did what he believed was right, but people saw him as a hero. But he knew the fight was not over. There were still barriers, systems that needed to change, and people who needed to be protected. Standing on the steps of City Hall, surrounded by a cheering crowd, Malik felt a rare sense of calm. It had been a long time since the city had had such a moment. They had come a long way, and today they stood not only to celebrate but also to affirm that they had taken back their own power. For the first time in years, Malik felt hope for himself, for the city, and for the future. 6 months had passed since the Civilian Review Board was put into operation. Changes, though small, were evident. The board had dealt with numerous violations, and abusive officers were being held accountable. Transparency was no longer a slogan but the new norm. While the road ahead was still bumpy, the mood in the city had changed. Today, at the board's first public meeting, Malik was invited to speak. The event drew a crowd of media, community leaders, and activists, all waiting to see what would happen next. As he stepped up to the podium, Malik looked out at the crowd. He saw familiar faces, people who had stood beside him at protests, people who had fought for justice. Taking a deep breath, he spoke in a soft but powerful voice. "We are here today not because of a single incident, but because of years of injustice, years of silence, years of disregard for human life. But we are here now. And we will continue to be here, until this system reflects its true values: justice, equality, and dignity for all." The applause was thunderous, but Malik knew that applause was not the most important thing. What he wanted was real change, lasting change. He went on to talk about the challenges ahead, about the resistance from those who want to cling to the past, and about the responsibility everyone has to maintain the gains that have been made. "Change doesn't happen overnight," he said, repeating a line he had repeated countless times. But this time, he felt different. He wasn't the only one who believed in those words, the city did, too. "It's happening. We are building a future where no one is afraid of those sworn to protect them. We are not just speaking out, we are acting. We are holding those in power accountable, and we will not stop when this meeting is over. No one can silence the will of the awakened." As Malik walked out of the hall, a young woman approached. Her eyes were wide, filled with admiration and emotion. "You give us hope," she said, her voice trembling. "I grew up thinking things would never change, but now, I believe they can." Malik smiled, a smile both gentle and determined. "It can happen," he said softly. "But it takes all of us. Change is always met with resistance." Even as the movement grew, not everyone was ready to let go of the past. The threatening letters and anonymous emails continued to pour in. One night, he was even stopped right outside his office door. The man standing before him, a former police officer, had angry eyes and a low voice as sharp as a knife. "You think you won?" the man growled. "You think you've changed anything? People like me built this city, and people like you only destroy it." Malik did not back down. He looked straight at the man, a representative of the past, and replied, his voice unwavering. "It's time for something better." The officer sneered, a bitter laugh. He said nothing more, just turned and walked away. But even after he was gone, Malik felt the weight of the confrontation weighing down on him. He knew change wasn't always welcome, and there were always those who would try to hold on to their power at all costs. But that didn't stop him. That evening, Malik's phone rang. Ramirez. Her voice was strange, not her usual strong tone, but something tired and worn. "They're still watching me," she whispered as they met in a small coffee shop, where the warm yellow light did nothing to dispel the tension in her eyes. "I can feel it every time I leave the apartment, every time I walk into work. They don't say anything, but I know they're waiting for me to make a mistake." Malik frowned, anger rising in his chest. "You did the right thing, Ramirez. You exposed the truth. That's what matters." She sighed, leaning back in her chair, her eyes shining with loss. "I know. But it's hard to shake the feeling that I've given up too much. I've lost the respect of my colleagues, I've lost the opportunity to advance. My family doesn't understand why I did it." Malik gripped his coffee cup, his voice firm. "You did it because it was the right thing to do. And it's not something you should regret." Ramirez looked at him for a long moment, then smiled, a tired smile but one that still held conviction. "I just hope it was worth it." Malik nodded, his eyes shining with determination. "It's always worth it." As time went on, Malik continued to fight, expanding the scope of his fight. He focused not just on the police but on the justice system as well. He worked with public defenders, campaigned for better resources, supported those who couldn't afford proper legal representation. He knew the road was long. But he also knows that as long as there is one person who believes in change, the light will continue to shine through the darkness. Malik understood that police reform was important, but it was only one piece of a much larger puzzle. In a tense strategy meeting, Emma proposed a citywide initiative to address racial injustices not just in the justice system, but in education, housing, and health care. These systemic problems could no longer be ignored. Malik looked around the room, seeing the eyes of his teammates on him. There was no turning back. "We have a real opportunity to make a difference," Emma said, her voice filled with passion. "If we mobilize the community, we can change this city in ways no one has ever imagined." A glint of light appeared in Malik's eyes. "We have momentum. Let's use it wisely." And so they embarked on a bold campaign, not just to reform the police, but to address decades of entrenched injustices in society. Community meetings were held, and leaders from all walks of life were invited to come together to develop a comprehensive plan. The buzz from New York quickly spread, sparking interest in other cities. Malik's name was soon on the national news. He became a symbol of change, invited to conferences to meet with lawmakers, sharing his vision for a more just society. But with fame came pressure. His every move was scrutinized, his every decision dissected by the media. There were long nights when he sat alone, wondering if his sacrifices were worth it. The criticism was relentless, sleep was cut short, personal moments became a luxury. But then, he remembered the people he met along the way. The woman who held his hand tightly, tears streaming down her face as she thanked him for giving her hope. The young, ambitious girl who told him she wanted to become a lawyer because of what he had done. The families who finally found justice thanks to his tireless efforts. Malik knew he couldn't stop. His work had not only changed the city, but inspired many other parts of the country. He had become a symbol of hope, of resilience. But he also understood that the fight was not over. The system could not be changed overnight, and there were still challenges ahead, new struggles waiting. One evening, as he sat alone in his office, the yellow light shining on the piles of files, his phone rang. It was a text message from his mother, just a few words, "I'm proud of you." Malik smiled, a smile of relief but full of meaning. In that moment, all the pressure, all the fatigue seemed to disappear. A sense of peace enveloped him. The journey continued. "But I know, I'm not alone." Malik stood on the rooftop of the old building where he had spent his youth fighting for justice. The twinkling lights of the skyline were reflected in his deep eyes. His breathing was slow and steady, as if he were absorbing every moment of this city, a city that had changed because of his tireless efforts. Malik had fought against injustice all his life, against the old systems that had held back the progress of society. He had fought not only for himself but also for his community, for those left behind, for those who had never had a voice. It was a hard fight, sometimes seemingly endless. But he never gave up. Looking back, Malik felt a deep sense of gratitude. His family, his companions, those who had stood by him in his darkest moments, they were all part of this journey. They stood together, faced adversity together, and most importantly, they found the light together. The years that followed were slow but steady progress. The Civilian Review Board he fought to establish became an integral part of city government. Accountability was no longer a slogan but a reality. No one could hide wrongdoing anymore, no one could stand above justice. But despite his accomplishments, Malik never rested on his laurels. He knew that the work was never truly done. There were still generations to lead, and there were still struggles to be solved. But at least he had laid the groundwork, he had made a difference. 10 years after his landmark lawsuit, a statue was erected in Harlem to honor his contributions to the city and the country. It was not just a tribute to him, but a recognition of all those who have fought for a better world. At the unveiling, Malik stood with his mother, Emma Ramirez, and his former companions. As he looked up at the statue, an elegant, simple image of a man reaching out to lift someone up, Malik felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was not fame, not recognition. This was real change, tangible change that had touched the lives of countless people. The sunset bathed the statue in gold, a reminder of the light he had brought to the community. Malik turned to his mother, his eyes filled with pride. "We did it," he said softly. Emma smiled, taking her son's hand, her voice warm but firm. "Yes, we did it." And with that, Malik stepped into the future, ready to continue his journey. Because justice isn't a destination. It's a journey, and he's willing to walk it all the way, no matter how long it takes.